I am the sun of wisdom and the ocean of knowledge. I cheer the faint and revive the dead. I am the guiding light that illumineth the way. I am the royal falcon on the arm of the Almighty. I unfold the drooping wings of every broken bird and start it on its flight. Bahá'u'lláh. The all-knowing physician hath his finger on the pulse of mankind. He perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. Every age hath its own problem, and every soul its particular aspiration. The remedy the world needeth in its present day afflictions can never be the same as that which a subsequent age may require. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. Bahá'u'lláh.
Thank you. So today our speaker is Dr. Kendal Williams, and he'll be talking about an introduction to the writings of Baha'u'lláh after his declaration. And this is a part 2 to the previous presentation he gave on our channel. Dr. Kendal Williams is a professor of medicine at the University of Pennsylvania and the editor of the Baha'i website, sifterofdust.org. He studied at Haverford College before attending Penn Med School and then completed his residency and chief residency at the University of Pittsburgh before returning to Penn as faculty. He's a general internist by training and the founding director of the Penn Center for Evidence-Based Practice. He is now the host of the Penn Primary Care podcast and continues to perform clinical work and teach at Penn. So with that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Williams.
Thank you, Paimane. Let me see, get myself situated here. Oh, thank you everyone for joining again. I gave a talk a few weeks ago that was part 1 of of introduction to the writings of Baha'u'lláh. You know, this is from my perspective. I just wanted to highlight things within the writings of Baha'u'lláh for those who may not be as familiar with them, some things that I found really helpful to know as I approach the writings of Baha'u'lláh, and as you approach the writings of Baha'u'lláh, I think it's helpful to kind of have some context. And so the purpose of this talk was to give both sort of historical context, but also sort of theological context to the writings of Baha'u'lláh. And so today we're going to talk about everything that happened after he declared his mission in Baghdad. And I'll go over that in a second. But let's start again, as we do all the time, with the basic truths of the Baha'i faith. I think they're very straightforward. Baha'u'lláh taught that there's one God who is the ultimate source of all reality. And, you know, I think that one of the more significant teachings in the Baha'i faith, and certainly something that attracted me, was this idea that all of the great religions of humankind have really come from the same God and are a reflection of the divine will. We are all worshiping the same reality. We may call it by different names based on a lot of different issues, maybe where we grew up, you know, what we were exposed to as children, what we've come comfortable with. But the essence of all of the great religions is the word of God, is the will of God being delivered to humanity. And that is what is the spiritual connection we have to all of these texts, whether it be the Hebrew Bible, the Gospels, the Quran, the writings of the Buddha, and so forth. But what Baha'u'lláh brought into the world and highlighted, which was present in the previous religions as well, but not as highlighted, was that the revelations of God continuously come to the world and they adapt their standards to the age in which they appear. And so this idea known as progressive revelation really sets the context, I think, for us to understand Baha'u'lláh, because Baha'u'lláh simply claimed that he was the next great revealer of God's will to humanity. And his religion, coming as it did only 150 to 200 years ago, represents the standards of God for our time in history. And, you know, whenever you read the writings of Baha'u'lláh, the thing that he emphasizes again and again is the principle of the oneness of humanity. And, you know, Baha'u'lláh says in many passages that the purposes of religion is to bring unity to the human race. I used this passage in the previous talk to highlight that fact. Baha'u'lláh says, the purpose of that which hath been sent down from the heaven of the will of God in this most exalted, this most holy revelation is the unity of the world and love and fellowship among its peoples. And so that's the purpose of Baha'u'llah's revelation. Baha'u'llah tells us that's actually the purpose of all religion, is really to bring unity to people. Now, when we last left off, I told the story of Baha'u'llah being exiled from Iran, his native homeland, Persia, to Baghdad. And we talked about the 10 years that he spent in Baghdad, really preparing the community for his ultimate declaration of his mission, which occurred at the end of his time in Baghdad, really just as he was leaving, as he was being exiled further. And so everything before that time, and I highlighted the Book of Certitude, otherwise known as the Kitab-i-Gan, which really outlines a lot of the teachings, the central theology of Baha'u'llah's religion, as well as companion works like the Tabernacle of Unity, which is a set of answers to questions to a man from Zoroastrian background, and really covers a lot of the same ideas that are in the Book of Certitude, as well as two other texts that he revealed in Baghdad. The Call of the Divine Beloved is a compilation of tablets that Baha'u'llah wrote to mystics from a Muslim background. And then the incomparable Hidden Words, which really is a remarkable work in and of itself. It's very mystical, very deeply beautiful. But in that, Baha'u'llah is revealing a text in which God speaks directly to humanity. And so in these other texts, Baha'u'llah alluded to the fact that he was the messenger of God for humanity for this time, and but really was explaining how such a claim could be made. In the Hidden Words, it's remarkable because it really is revealed from the voice of God himself. And so, we get a little bit of a sense. It would be hard even for a believer, even for a person living in the Baghdad period, to read the Hidden Words and not think that Baha'u'llah was claiming something special, even if he hadn't made it overt. So when Baha'u'llah did reveal to mostly the friends who came to greet him as he was leaving Baghdad, that he was indeed the promised one of all ages, the manifestation of God, the messenger of God for humanity at this time. He said that there was a rose garden, in the rose garden of changeless splendor, a flower was beginning to bloom. And so everything we see after Baha'u'llah's exile from Baghdad is really now him giving his revelation. Well, so the flower is blooming. The flower of his revelation is fully in blooming, and we'll see that play out. So, I made the point that, and I think it's important that we talk about these revelations of God in their inner essence. They're timeless and eternal. They are the will of God being spoken directly to humanity. But because of history, and because of the differences of people around the world and the cultures to which they come, they have differences, right? They have an outer clothing, if you will, that is different. And the revelations of God, as I said, don't just drop out of the sky, right? They need to be understood by a generation of people, and then carried forward and grown into these great world religions and really civilizations. So, what Baha'u'llah, frankly, is claiming here is that he is bringing the moral and spiritual principles underlying a world civilization. He is giving us a vision of ourselves and of the great religions of humanity and of all the various beautiful races and peoples around the world as being at one. And then we can stop fighting about all of these trivial things that divide us, because we have fundamental moral and spiritual principles that we can use to have a peaceful world civilization. And that's where Baha'u'llah is going to get to. So let's talk about, now let's go back in history and talk about what happened next. So Baha'u'llah was exiled. I always forget these things. I should have a printout of my slides so I know exactly where I'm going. from this point on, from the time of Baha'u'llah's declaration on forward, he is going to speak with a different voice than he did when he was in Baghdad before his declaration. He will now take on the voice of God directly, right? He will reveal and speak with the voice of God. And it's quite striking, right? I mean, this is not new, right? So Jesus said, I and the Father are one. Whatever I see reflects the will of the Father. It was actually a little more pronounced in the Quran when the Prophet Muhammad revealed the Quran, and he said that he was just a prophet enunciating the teachings of God to humanity that came through him, and the voice in the Quran in many passages is the voice of God himself, right? So this is not a new thing. And so, and Baha'u'llah laid the theological framework for understanding this in his time in Baghdad. So by the time he gets to this point where he is making his claims, a lot of the folks who were paying attention had already been educated to understand how we can make these claims. And, one of the things I highlighted in the last talk was this amazing figure by the name of the Bab, this young prophet who preceded Baha'u'llah, who really acted as a John the Baptist for him and prepared the way for the coming of Baha'u'llah. And, the Bab has really interesting writings about the one who would come after him. And I actually wanted to start this talk with a passage from the writings of the Bab that was really striking to me and really helped me to understand what exactly it is when I'm reading the writings of Baha'u'llah after his declaration. So the Bab said to his followers at this time, so this is before Baghdad, this is before Baha'u'llah has become even prominent. He says, when the day star of Baha will shine resplendent above the horizon of eternity, it is incumbent upon you to present yourselves before his throne. He's telling his followers, prepare for him the day that he comes. And when he comes, you need to present yourself before his throne. He said, it behooveth you to remain silent before this throne. For indeed of all things which have been created between heaven and earth, nothing on that day will be deemed more fitting than the observance of silence. Beg ye of him the wondrous token of his favor, inasmuch on that day all the revelations of divine bounty shall circle around the seat of his glory and emanate from his presence. It's beautiful. I mean, the Bab's writings, Baha'u'llah's writings, use a language that is, incomparable, really. And so even if you don't know what all these words mean, or you've never heard language like this, just listen to it with your inner ear, if you will, and you'll just feel it. It's so beautiful and so powerful. But the Bab goes on to say in that passage, he says, verily on that day, the day when he comes into the world and makes his claim known, the learning of the learned shall prove of no avail. Neither the accomplishments of the exponents of knowledge, nor the pomp of the highly honored, nor the power of the mighty, nor the remembrance of the devout, nor the deeds of the righteous, nor the genuflection of the kneeling worshiper, nor the honor of the honored, nor the kinship of the highly born, nor the nobility of those of noble descent, nor the discourse of the eloquent, nor the titles of the prominent. None of these shall be of any avail, inasmuch as all these, and whatever else you have known or comprehended, were created by his word of command, be, and it is. So, what the Bab is expressing, which he expressed in his writings and Baha'u'llah explained in the Kitab-i-Gan and other texts, is that when a manifestations of God comes into the world, they represent the Spirit of God in the world. There is all of these things that we might pride ourselves on and see the world through, whether we're smart or, born into wealth or whatever. None of those things matter. He says, because all of those things were actually created by the will of God, and the messenger of God is the express pillar of the word of God. And so it's a beautiful passage, and I think it sets us up for thinking about the voice which Baha'u'llah is going to use after his declaration, which is going to be very different. Okay, so Baha'u'llah leaves Baghdad. Now, the reasons for his leaving Baghdad are interesting. So he had become quite prominent in Baghdad, and among many different peoples, the government ministers would seek his counsel. And so, he was very beloved and well known. And the Persians wanted him farther away from them because a lot of Persians would come to Baghdad, and there is some pilgrimage places on the Ottoman side of the border, and they would come through Baghdad and they would hear about Baha'u'lláh and they would visit him and so forth. So he was having an influence on these Persians who were coming through that area. So they said they wanted him farther away. And the Ottomans, this was the time of the Ottoman Empire with the Sultan, right? And he had two ministers who did most of the work of the realm. They looked at Baha'u'lláh and they said, we actually think we might be able to use this guy in our intrigue against the Persians. So they invited him to come to the capital, Constantinople, to, basically, and I learned this recently through a history text I was reading, that, he was brought there because the Ottomans thought that they might be able to get him on their side in relation to whatever debates they had with the Persians. And so it was for a political reason that he was brought to Constantinople, which is now Istanbul, by the way. It's still the capital of modern day Turkey. But Baha'u'lláh was not willing to participate in any of this political intrigue. He was the manifestation of God. He wasn't there to, slop it up, if you will, with the courtly ministers. And this was a transactional political situation. So it was, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And so a lot of Persians who would come to the Ottoman center would go to one of the ministers and bring gifts. And the understanding was, that we're going to give you a gift and you give us something in return. It was the whole thing was very transactional. And so when Baha'u'lláh got there, some people said to him, you should go visit the minister. And he said, well, they've invited me here. I'm not going to go participate in this sort of gift giving thing. I'm not going to go there and seek political favors. I don't want any political favors. I'm independent of all of that. And so he said, if they want me to come, they'll invite me. And so, but they were somewhat put off by this because, he wasn't participating in their games, if you will. And so Baha'u'llah's stay in Constantinople was actually pretty short. It was only about 3 months before he was exiled further. And it's very interesting because Baha'u'lláh comments upon the politics of this capital city. And I suppose it's probably not all that different from the politics of any other capital city in the country, certainly, Washington, D.C. And I think of this passage of Baha'u'lláh quite often when thinking about Washington, D.C. He said, "We found upon our arrival in the city its governors and elders as children gathered about and disporting themselves with clay. Incline your ears to the counsels which this servant giveth you for the sake of God. He verily asked no recompense from you, and is resigned to what God hath ordained for him, and is entirely submissive to God's will." So I love this. Baha'u'lláh compared these political games to a bunch of people just playing, a bunch of children playing with clay. And he said they were immature. And they were too immature to understand even his own claims. So Baha'u'lláh was then exiled out of Constantinople to Adrianople, which is a much smaller city that sits in the European portion of modern day Turkey. It's still in Turkey. And it was in the European portion of the Ottoman Empire. So Adrianople, which is now known as Edirne, Baha'u'lláh called the land of mystery. I don't know why, actually. Maybe someone can say that in the comments. But whenever you hear him refer to the land of mystery, he's referring to Adrianople. And so Baha'u'lláh would stay here for 5 years. Once the Ottoman authorities realized that he wasn't going to play the political game, they exiled him in a very cursory and somewhat unpleasant manner. And he and his family, they were sort of put in packing cars, and sent off to Adrianople. And when they got to Adrianople, the place that they had to stay, it was wintertime, had no heat. And so they were kind of on their own as exiles to find their own place to live. And so Baha'u'lláh would stay in Adrianople or Aderna for 5 years. And it's really a place, I think, where the transition occurred from the Bab's faith to Baha'u'llah's faith, to the Baha'i faith. In a sense, it's the place that the Baha'i faith was born, because it is at this time that Baha'u'lláh reveals and proclaims his religion to not only the kings and rulers of the earth, and I'm going to go over those tablets, but also to all of the Bab's followers in Iran, in Persia. And, there were thousands of them, and others who had become followers of Baha'u'lláh, but didn't yet know what his claim was. And so during this time in Adrianople, it was really the time when a lot of these folks were converted to Baha'u'llah's faith. And 98%, it's estimated that 98% of the community of people who regarded themselves as followers of the Bab would become Baha'is at this time. But it's also a time of great sorrow, because some of the divisions that existed within the community would rear their ugly head and become more permanent. And Baha'u'lláh in Baghdad was very sin covering. He had a sin covering eye. And not all of the folks that were around him were necessarily good people, I guess. But he continued to shower his love upon them in the hopes that they would, sort of come out of it. And in Adrianople, it was the period of time where you get a frank rebellion from a few souls in particular that really caused a great deal of difficulty for Baha'u'lláh. And the chief among them was his own half-brother that Baha'u'lláh had essentially raised, and who was profoundly jealous of his older brother, and began to really try to turn the community against him, and successfully turn the Ottoman authorities against Baha'u'lláh, such that he ended up having to be exiled further by the Ottoman authorities. And it was really due to the difficulties and intrigue of his half-brother. So that's what's going to happen in Adrianople. And Baha'u'lláh is going to stay in several houses, and this is the one that still exists. You can visit it. I've been here. It's really wonderful to go and see one of the places, the last house, I believe, that Baha'u'lláh stayed in Adrianople. And this is an earlier picture. It's in much better shape now, and had fallen into significant disrepair before the Baha'is were able to bring it back to life. But what's significant about this period is that Baha'u'lláh speaks with the voice of God. And remember that I had said that, he had really had an audience of people of Muslim backgrounds, both Shia and Sunni. He had Zoroastrian connections. He had a number of members of the Jewish faith who became Baha'is even during the Baghdad period. But there weren't as many Christians. And so Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the kings, because most of the kings of the world, most significant kings of the world, were Christian background, this was his first proclamation to Christendom, if you will. And so he addressed, Queen Victoria, Pope Pius. He addressed Napoleon III, Kaiser Wilhelm, and so forth, the first, and directly with tablets. And we're going to go over these. So to all the kings, Baha'u'lláh said, "Lay not aside the fear of God, O kings of the earth, and beware that you transgress not the bounds which the Almighty hath fixed. Be vigilant that you may not do injustice to anyone, be it to the extent of a grain of mustard seed. Tread ye the path of justice, for this verily is the straight path. Compose your differences and reduce your armaments. Heal the dissensions that divide you, that you will no longer need any armaments except for what the protection of your cities and territories demands." So this was a time of great imperialism among the European powers. You know, the British were very imperialistic, trying to take over, and they were all seeking raw materials for an increasingly industrialized economy. And so they were not only competing with the rest of the world, they were competing with each other. And they were still fighting each other, right? So the Germans and the French, and this would ultimately lead up to World War I. The attitudes and behaviors of the leaders of Europe at this time would lead to two great world wars. And Baha'u'lláh, before those things are to unfold, is really warning them and telling them to avoid what could come if they're not careful. So Baha'u'llah's one of the more significant tablets is to Queen Victoria, and you'll see. As I said, he speaks with the voice of God throughout all of these tablets. It's a proclamation of the revelation of God has come to humanity. He says, O Queen in London, incline thine ear unto the voice of thy Lord, the Lord of all mankind, calling from the divine lote tree. Verily no God is there but me, the Almighty, the All-Wise. Cast away all that is on earth, and attire the head of thy kingdom with the crown of the remembrance of thy Lord, the All-Glorious. He in truth hath come unto the world in his most great glory, and all that hath been mentioned in the gospel hath been fulfilled. So, you know, when Baha'i say that Baha'u'llah claimed to be the return of Christ, we're not kidding. And that's what he says right here, right? And he announces it as a prisoner of the Ottoman and Persian empires to the Queen, probably the most powerful ruler on earth at this point. But, you know, he speaks to the Queen Victoria in a benevolent way, and recognizes that a lot of good things have happened within the British Empire. And he praises her for those things. He says, we have been informed that thou hast forbidden the trading in slaves, both men and women. This is what God hath enjoined in this wondrous revelation. God hath truly destined a reward for thee because of this. And we can remember, you know, Baha'u'llah's declaration was 1863. The Emancipation Proclamation in the U.S. was, I think, 1864. I believe it's 1863. So that's when Abraham Lincoln announced the end of slavery, when of course led to civil war and so forth. But the British had done it before. They had prohibited the slave trading before that, mostly because of the influence of Quakers within the British realm. But in any case, Baha'u'llah praises her for this. And, you know, and Baha'u'llah would forbid, it's the first time slavery had formally been forbidden in any of the books of God. Baha'u'llah forbids it in his book of laws that we'll get to. And then he goes on to say, we have also heard thou hast entrusted the reins of counsel into the hands of the representatives of the people. Thou indeed hast done well, for thereby the foundations of the edifice of thine affairs will be strengthened, and the hearts of all that are beneath thy shadow, whether high or low, will be tranquilized. So, you know, he's really praising her for the birth of parliamentary democracy, and the people's input into their affairs directly through the House of Lords and the House of Commons and so forth. But then he gives a point that he gives also in his tablet to the American Republic. He says, it behooves them, however, these parliamentarians, to be trustworthy among his servants and to regard themselves as the representatives of all that dwell on earth. This is what counsels them in this tablet, he who is the ruler, the all-wise. So he praises parliamentary democracy, but he says it must be based on moral and spiritual principles, and the representatives should not just see themselves as advocating for the people where they live, but also for all of the needs of all the people in the world, which is quite a change, and reflects Baha'u'llah's focus on all the peoples of the world and bringing peace to the entire planet. Now, to Napoleon, this is Napoleon III. It's not Napoleon I. Now, Napoleon I there's a movie made about him, and most of when people say Napoleon, they mean Napoleon I. This was Napoleon III, and he was still trying to conquer things. And Baha'u'llah wrote two tablets to him. The first one was more humbly spoken, but he clearly claimed to be God. The the story is that when he received the tablet, he said, he threw it over his shoulder and he said, if this man claims to be God, then I am two gods. And so the second tablet we have from Baha'u'lláh to this man, after he responded so pridefully, is much stronger. Baha'u'lláh says, O king in Paris, O king of Paris, tell the priest to ring the bells no longer. Right? This is Notre Dame. He's saying, and Notre Dame was just rebuilt and they just rang the bell again, right? Baha'u'lláh is saying, O king of Paris, tell the priest to ring the bells no longer. By God, the true one, the most mighty bell hath appeared. We have desired for thee naught except that which is better for thee than what you possess and all the treasures of the earth. Baha'u'lláh continually tries to tell these prideful leaders who were focused on their own wealth and dominion that nothing about their material wealth was going to do them any benefit, that it's only in spiritual wealth does a true human being grow. And then he gave him a warning. He says, O king, had thou been sincere in thy words, thou wouldst not have cast behind thy back of the book of God. For what thou hast done, thy kingdom shall be thrown into confusion, and thine empire shall pass from thine hands, as a punishment for what thou hast wrought. Then wilt thou know how thou hast plainly erred. Hath thy pomp made thee proud? By my life it shall not endure. So this king, Napoleon, would get in a war with what is now Germany and lose and be brought as a prisoner to Germany. And so Baha'u'llah's prophecy really did come to pass. So Baha'u'lláh then actually addresses another tablet to the guy who conquered Napoleon, right? And he says, O king of Berlin, give ear unto the voice calling from this manifest temple. Verily, there is none other God but me, the everlasting, the peerless, the ancient of days. Take heed lest pride debar you from recognizing the dayspring of divine revelation. So dayspring is a word that means like the dawn, the sun of divine revelation. Again, Baha'u'lláh is speaking with the voice of God. He says, do you remember the one whose power transcended thy power and whose station excelled thy station, referring to Napoleon III? Where is he? Whither are gone the things he possessed? Think deeply, O king, concerning him and concerning them who, like unto thee, have conquered cities and ruled over men. The all-merciful brought them down from their palaces to their graves. And, very powerful. And Baha'u'lláh says this again and again to these prideful leaders that are conquering and really causing a great deal of destruction and death on the European continent, that their priorities are completely off, right? And that eventually everything that they are going to die, and nothing of what they have achieved will remain, and that it's not worth it, right? And then he gives another prophecy about Germany, right? This is very interesting. He says, O banks of the Rhine. So the Rhine River goes through the German capital of Berlin, right? We have seen you covered with gore. Gore meaning dead humans, right? Inasmuch as the swords of retribution were drawn against you, and you shall have another turn. And we hear the lamentations of Berlin, though she be today in conspicuous glory, right? So this is a prophecy of Baha'u'lláh to a man that is now thinking that he has just conquered the French and he can now be the leader of Europe, and he's going to go on his own imperialist efforts throughout Europe, and that's going to lead to World War I, and that's going to lead to World War II, right? So Baha'u'lláh is prophesizing the coming of World War I and II, right? He says, and the swords of retribution were drawn against you, and then you shall have another turn, right? So very powerful, and there's a number of prophecies within Baha'u'llah's tablets. Baha'is are not, Baha'u'lláh did not ask us not to focus on miracles, but there are a lot of passages in the writings of Baha'u'lláh that are quite prophetic in almost a very specific way, and this is one of them. Okay, so Baha'u'lláh addresses the Pope, right? The Pope, this was the last Pope, by the way, who had worldly authority, and was not a very good Pope. He was kind of a very pompous Pope. And Baha'u'lláh announced his mission to him, but then he said, O Supreme Pontiff, Consider a pearl which shines by virtue of its inherent nature. If it be covered with silk, its luster and beauty will be concealed. Likewise, man's distinction lies in the excellence of his conduct and the pursuit of that which beseems his station, not in childish play and pastimes. Know thou that in thy true endowment consisteth in the love of God and thy detachment from all save him, and not in the luxuries thou dost possess. Abandon them unto those who seek them, and turn unto God, who cause the rivers to flow. So I always love that passage, just so beautiful and so powerful. And, not all the popes, some of the popes were very worldly and were like kings and enjoyed the luxuries that the Catholic Church provided them. That's what Baha'u'lláh is referring to. Now, it should be said that Baha'u'llah's addresses to religious leaders in general were two-sided. He condemned their use of religion for their own benefit, but also praised them when they did the right thing and said that they were lights in the heaven of God's will. So there's two aspects to this. But Baha'u'lláh took these tablets of all of to all of the great kings, and he had them put into one very long tablet called the Suri Haikal, or the Tablet of the Temple. And then he also revealed other things within that tablet. And the Suri Haikal is very powerful. It's kind of a shock and awe type of experience to read this tablet, because Baha'u'lláh explains the power that the will of God has upon the world. And he puts it in very beautiful terms. It's extremely powerful tablet. And at the end of that tablet, it's really proclamatory about his own mission, about what the will of God means for the world. It's just a very powerful tablet. And at the end of it, he says, "Thus have we built the temple with the hands of power and might. This is the temple promised to you in the book. Draw ye nigh unto it. This is that which profits you. Could you but comprehend it? Be fair, O peoples of the earth. Which is preferable, this or a temple which is built of clay?" And, so just this powerful idea, and that the real reality of religion is not in these temples and other places that we worship, but rather in the will of God as manifested through the messengers of God. And Baha'u'lláh, after really sort of demonstrating the power of the will of God in this temple, says he arranged actually each of the tablets, and it's in calligraphy. He had them arranged so that they formed the temple, a physical temple, or an artistic rendering of a temple, and then says, "Be fair, O people, which is preferable, this or a temple built of clay?" And so we have in this phase Baha'u'llah's proclamation to the leaders of the world, and very powerful and very beautiful. Baha'u'llah's very clear about his relationship to other religions. He says all of them are one, right? And he's simply bringing the next phase. I will say though this, it's more pronounced. The Baha'u'llah's revelation is much more pronounced about God's presence in the world than other religions before. And this is something that he said was the case, that, as humanity develops, it can develop a richer and more comprehensive relationship with God. And so Baha'u'llah's revelation and all of what he wrote, I think, really reflects that. You'll see that. But he talks about his relationship to other religions. He says, "I swear by God, O people, I came only to rid your religions of all that hath in this day become the cause of contention. These verses, O people, are the breezes of the Spirit wafting over you, and would transmute your mortal condition into eternal life, could you but fix your gaze upon them." Yeah. Okay, so let's go back to Adrianople. And as I noted, this was not only the time of Baha'u'llah's proclamation of the kings and these majestic tablets that are so powerful. You can find them, by the way, and I didn't highlight this in a slide, but you can find them in a work known as the Summons of the Lord of Hosts. They are all collected in there. And so that's another book to read. And these are all basically the summary of the compilation of the tablets of Baha'u'lláh to the kings. But it's at this time that Baha'u'lláh is also, converting the hearts of the people in a formal way who had already been drawn to him and had been drawn to the religion of the Bab. And, Baha'u'lláh had been nurturing these communities in Persia over the 10 years he was in Baghdad. The Kitabi Ghan was extremely popular. In fact, there were people that had their whole profession was copying the Kitabi Ghan. Because, in this day, it was before the printing press, at least here, or they didn't use it. And so you had individuals who would simply copy, the Igan and then sell those copies. And so, and it was, it was going off the shelves. So there was a lot of knowledge. They were teaching the things that Baha'u'lláh had already revealed in there. They were converting other people to the faith at that point, even before Baha'u'lláh proclaimed his mission. So there was a great eagerness going on in the communities that were already attracted to Baha'u'lláh. And so, when he did proclaim his mission, they were really prepared for it. And it really reflects all that preparatory work that Baha'u'lláh, that most of them became followers, 98%. There's oh dear. So I am going to do something. I was trying to figure how to go backwards, and maybe we can edit this out, but I can't figure out how to do it from the there we go. I'm going to do from the main slide share. Okay, we're going to go back. There's a beautiful tablet that Baha'u'lláh revealed in Persian at this time, and it's known as the Tablet of Ahmad. Now, there are two tablets of Ahmad. There's one in Arabic that is much more popular than this one. This one is beautiful and revealed in Persian and is present in gleanings from the writings of Baha'u'lláh, and is just a beautiful mystical tablet. And it was this kind of tablet that Baha'u'lláh was revealing at this time, at this period, really to help the souls accept his revelation. I just want to give you a flavor for it. I'll read a paragraph. He says, "Thine eye is my trust. Suffer not the dust of vain desires to becloud its luster. Thine ear is a sign of my bounty. Let not the tumult of seemly motives turn it away from my word that encompasses all creation. Thine heart is my treasury. Allow not the treacherous hand of self to rob thee of the pearls which I have treasured therein. Thine hand is a symbol of my loving kindness. Hinder it not from holding fast to my guarded and hidden tablets. Unasked, I have showered upon thee my grace. Unpetitioned, I have fulfilled thy wish. In spite of thy undeserving, I have singled thee out for my richest, my incalculable favors." Beautiful. This is a beautiful tablet. It's probably one of my favorites. Really God speaking directly to humanity and telling us what it is when a revelation of God comes into the world and what we can derive from it, right? So, okay. So the other thing that happened in Adrianople, which was significant, was the rebellion of Baha'u'llah's half-brother Mirza Yahya. And he had been somewhat of a nominal leader of the Bab's community after the Bab had been martyred. And so a lot of Babis, or followers of the Bab, thought that he was sort of in charge, and he really liked being in charge, but he was a very cowardly individual. And he kind of hung around Baha'u'lláh for his support and was afraid of making himself more known, lest he be, persecuted for his faith. And of course, Baha'u'lláh wasn't at all shy and was writing to the leaders of not only, I highlighted the European kings, but he was writing leaders to the kings that had power over him, right? He was writing tablets to the Ottoman Sultan and the Ottoman ministers. as well as the Persian Shah. And so these were the folks that had him in captivity, right? So Baha'u'lláh was out and staking his claim and was doing it with great force and great courage. And his half brother was really hiding away, and so and but his half brother was very jealous of him, and during the Adrianople period, actually came up with a plan to try and poison Baha'u'lláh, and did poison Baha'u'lláh with what is probably mercury chloride, that led him to be quite ill for several weeks, and left him with a shaking of his hand for the rest of his life. And he also did other things. And Baha'u'lláh then separated himself from him. And he also announced clearly to him, who was sort of had some, at least, title within the community of being a leader, that, he had to make a choice. Was he going to be a follower of Baha'u'lláh or not? And Mirza Yahya responded, it's half brother's name, Mirza Yahya, also with great pride and arrogance. And so Baha'u'lláh said that they had to separate. So they separated. This community, by the way, that was in Adrianople consisted of Baha'u'llah's family, but there were a lot of others that came around with him that didn't want to be separated from him, his own followers. And so it was a larger community that had followed him to Adrianople. And they had, in the 5 years that they were there, they had gotten jobs. They had set up shops in the bazaar and so forth, and they were working there. And then they were just because they wanted to be around Baha'u'lláh. And his half-brother was part of this group. And so Baha'u'lláh referred to this time period as the days of stress, because he sort of formally had to bring out in the open the rebellion of his half-brother, which was obviously a source of embarrassment. And so his half-brother and his followers, if you will, Baha'u'lláh would now refer in his writings as the people of the Bayan. Now, the Bayan was the Bab's book, of a holy book. And so anything up to the time through Baghdad, before Baha'u'llah's declaration, the people of the Bayan referred to the followers of the Bab who were to accept his mission. But after this point, when Baha'u'lláh referred to the people of the Bayan, he is referring to the people who have rejected his claim. And, there is a small percentage who did not, and it was led by his half-brother, who was himself eventually exiled and became sort of a non-important figure. But it was very stressful during this time because for the first time, Baha'u'lláh had to draw a distinction. And that distinction was made, and so forth. And that's why Baha'u'lláh referred to this time as the days of stress. And so in Baha'u'llah's writings from this period and subsequent period to some degree, you'll hear Baha'u'lláh refer to this rebellion, if you will, of these folks. And then what would happen is Mirza Yahya, in response, would go to Istanbul, would go to Constantinople, and really draw up intrigue with the prime minister there, and spread lies about what Baha'u'lláh was doing. They were in the European part of Turkey, and it was actually there was concern by the Ottomans about a rebellion in this area, which eventually did rebel and become Bulgaria. And Adrianople's about 4 miles from Bulgaria and about 7 miles from Greece or so. So it's really on the edge. And so they were worried about that at this point. And then what happened is Mirza Yahya went to the prime minister and said, "Oh yeah, he's siding with these rebellious guys." And so they decided to exile Baha'u'lláh further. And so it was because of that, even though he had nothing to do with it, had done nothing wrong, he got exiled further. And so Mirza Yahya really did a lot of damage to Baha'u'lláh and his family. So it's at this point then that Baha'u'lláh is exiled from Adrianople and brought into a true imprisonment. So in Adrianople, he was still free to move about the city just like he was in Baghdad. He wasn't as public as he was in Baghdad, because at that point, he was the manifestation of God, but he was also spending a lot of time revealing the writings and really developing the community. And now the Ottoman authorities decided to exile him further. And so they exiled him to Akka. And so Akka is a former Crusade city. It still exists. It's historical place near Haifa. Actually, I have a patient who grew up in Akka. It's an Israeli city now, but at that time it was a prison colony. It was where the Ottomans would send their prisoners to exile them. And so Baha'u'lláh got put in a true imprisonment in this prison with bars and gates and everything else. This is an image of the room in which he was placed. And, he would spend several years in this situation with limited connection with his followers, he and his family here. And, they would, so his followers would come from the early Baha'is would walk, often from Persia or anywhere along the way where they had become Baha'is, and then they would come just to see Baha'u'lláh, and sometimes they had to content themselves with just a wave of his hand from the prison window. It was a time when he was really shut out from the pilgrims. Eventually, after a few years, the Ottomans authorities kind of focused on something else, and Baha'u'lláh, as he had in many places of exile, the local people came to love him, the governor and so forth, and they sort of would relax in his imprisonment and allow people to come see him. So even while he was a prisoner in Akka, eventually pilgrims were able to see him. But this is this is kind of the efflorescence of Baha'u'llah's revelation during this period, because now he had announced his mission to the kings and rulers of the earth. He had announced his mission to the followers of the Bab. Most of them had become his followers. He had helped mature the community. Even the split that had occurred was a good thing and a purifying thing, because a lot of the folks that really had other intentions other than the pure-hearted attachment to Baha'u'llah's teachings sort of split off and went their own way, which was a good thing in some ways. And so he now had this community of people that were really ready to hear the full measure of the revelation of God. And so Baha'u'lláh would begin to educate them. But there's a couple things I wanted to highlight here. There's a tablet that Baha'u'lláh wrote back to the Sultan and the ministers who had imprisoned him in Akka, because their imprisonment was quite harsh. And when they showed up, they were given no food or water for a period of time, and a couple of them died. And Baha'u'lláh wrote a tablet back to them, and he said, let me see here, because I've got a little bit of a obstruction of things here. He said, even if this life giver and world reformer, referring to himself, be in thine estimation guilty of sedition and strife, what crime could have been committed by a group of women, children, and suckling mothers, that they should be thus afflicted with the scourge of thine anger and wrath? No faith or religion hath held children responsible. If thou bearest allegiance to any faith or religion, then thou shouldst know that, according to the heavenly books and all the divinely inspired and weighty scriptures, children are not to be held accountable. Have you imagined your glory to be imperishable and your dominion to be everlasting? Nay, by him who is the all-merciful, neither will your glory last, nor will mine abasement endure. Such abasement in the estimation of a true man is the pride of every glory. We see this again and again in the tablets of Baha'u'lláh, dealing with his own suffering and the suffering of his family, and others who were with him, that he is explaining that it is not through these activities that a human is subjugated. It is through their attachment to worldly things. And he will say throughout his tablets that he is actually less of a prisoner than they are, because they are dependent upon their wealth and power to make them feel good about themselves, basically. I have also struck by this passage, and I wanted to bring it up. I've been very hurt, I think you could say, of the course of warfare in the 24th century, both in Ukraine, in Israel, and in Gaza, and the slaughter of innocent civilians and children. And this passage comes to my mind a lot, as I see that we have seemed to forget the rules of warfare. And of course, this is playing out with the International Criminal Court right now. But, Baha'u'lláh did comment on this. And, he says, if you bear allegiance to any standard, you know that according to the heavenly books and scriptures, children are not to be held accountable. And so I think this is a very topical passage as well. I just wanted to bring that in, even though it may be seeming a little political. I think, it's relevant. All right. Baha'u'lláh tells this minister a story, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but it's a beautiful story to try and illustrate, these tablets that they're not for these people that were, supposedly receive them. They're really for us, right? To see how, as an example of how to deal with the difficulties of life and how to think about the leaders that lay sway over us, if those leaders are corrupt or out for their own intentions, how should we think about that? And he constantly using these leaders as an example so that we can learn from it, right? And he tells a parable, a story to this man of when he was a young man and his brother was getting married. And during that marriage ceremony, Bahá'u'lláh is from this wealthy family in Persia, so there's a lot of to-do around this marriage. And so there's this puppet show, right? And in this puppet show, they have this big display of a king and his ministers. It's basically showing what it's like at court, and how there's all of a sudden there's an outbreak of a rebellion, and he sends his men out there, and there's guns off in the distance, and it's just a big puppet show to sort of like an imperial court, right? And he then tells the story that at the end of the wedding, when everything was done and this puppet show was over, he saw this man leaving from the wedding grounds with a box. And he says, "What's in the box?" And the man says, that entire puppet show, all the spectacle of grandeur in that imperial court is now in this box, right? And and then Baha'u'lláh says this. He says, "What is this box?" I asked him, "and what is the nature of this display?" And the man says, "All this lavish display, these elaborate devices, the king, the princes, the ministers, their pomp and their glory, their might and their power, everything you saw are now contained in this box." And Baha'u'lláh says, "Ever since that day, all the trappings of the world have seemed in the eyes of this youth akin to the same spectacle. They have never been, nor will they ever be, of any weight and consequence, be it to the extent of a grain of mustard seed. How greatly I marveled that men should pride themselves on such vanities, while those possessed of insight, ere they witness any evidence of human glory, perceive with certainty the inevitability of its waning. It behooveth everyone to traverse this brief span of life with sincerity and fairness. Should one fail to attain unto the recognition of him who is the eternal truth, let him at least conduct himself with reason and justice. Ere long, these outward trappings, these visible treasures, these earthly vanities, these arrayed armies, these adorned vestures, these proud and overweening souls, all shall pass into the confines of the grave, as though into that box. In the eyes of those possessed of insight, all this conflict, contention, and vainglory hath ever been and will ever be like unto the play and pastimes of children. Very similar to what Baha'u'lláh was said about being in Constantinople at the imperial court or the imperial center of the Ottoman Empire, and his perceptions of what they were doing. They were like unto children playing with clay. And it's a great lesson, I think, for us, because we still see this in the modern day, So Baha'u'lláh is exiled in Akka and is writing tablets to the community. And so the pilgrims would come and they would leave with the tablets, right? And they would go back, and then these tablets would be copied among the communities, the Baha'i communities, and then they would get together and they would share them together. And, there are teachers, Baha'i teachers, going around and trying to support these communities and help them get together and become real communities. So they would get together for dawn prayers, and then they would get together to read the tablets of Baha'u'lláh. And they were diverse communities of people of different backgrounds in Persia. And so it was really building up this beautiful Baha'i community that would then itself spread all over the world. And so Baha'u'lláh said it was at this time that people were ready for laws, right? And the laws of God to come into the world. And it took a long time. I mean, he really worked on the community for 20 years before they were ready to have the laws. And so that's the Kitabi Akdas. As I mentioned in the last talk, Kitab means book. In this case, Akdas it means laws. So Kitabi Akdas is the book of laws. Baha'u'lláh referred to as the most holy book. And so if Baha'is have a book of laws, this is it. The Kitabi Akdas is pretty amazing. And it's interesting because it's not like a legal code at all. Baha'u'lláh talks about some very sublime principle and then gives a law, and then a very sublime principle and then gives a law. It's really beautiful to read it back to back. And I will say this, for those of us who live in the West, we probably don't, and we just pick up and read the Kitabi Akdas. It's important to have a little bit of background. Most of Baha'u'llah's followers at this point were Muslim. If they weren't Muslim, they were Jewish or Zoroastrian or others. And, so they were pretty used to religious law. They came from a very legalized, sort of regimented framework. Islamic law at this point was very regimented. And a lot of what is in the Akdas, Baha'u'lláh is abrogating previous laws and saying you don't have to follow these things anymore. So what's most significant about the Akdas, I think, is some of the things he abrogates. But I also, but at the end of the day, and I'll show you this in a few slides, there aren't a lot of laws so that he reveals. A lot of it is abrogating others and also giving the principles of his faith. But it starts out very powerfully. And what I love about the faith, and one of the things that has drawn me to it, is it's very logical. Baha'u'lláh explains the principles of his theology. He then acts in a way that's very consistent with those principles. He speaks with the voice of God, and it has explained how he can speak with the voice of God. And it's all very sensible. And so that's reflected in the first paragraph of the Akdas, where Baha'u'lláh says, basically, summary of the responsibility of humans. He says, the first duty prescribed by God for his servants is the recognition of him who is the dayspring of his revelation and the fountain of his laws. So the recognition of the manifestation of God, right? Who represents the Godhead in both the kingdom of his cause and the world of creation. So again, everything that Baha'u'lláh had said to this point, the manifestations of God reflect God to us. They are God to us, right? He said, the dayspring of his revelation is the messenger of God. The fountain of his laws is the messenger of God, who represents the Godhead, meaning God, in both the kingdom of his cause and the world of creation. He said, whoso achieveth this duty hath attained unto all good, and whoso is deprived thereof hath gone astray, though he be the author of every righteous deed. It behoveth every one who hath reached this most sublime station to observe every ordinance of him who is the desire of the world. These twin duties are inseparable, neither is acceptable without the other. Thus hath it been decreed by him who is the source of divine inspiration. So Baha'u'lláh said it's both faith and works that save you. To go back to an old sort of 18th century debate, or even 16th, 17th century debate within Christianity about what's more important, faith or works. Baha'u'lláh said faith in the manifestation of God is the most important duty of humans. And then following the teachings and the laws of the manifestation of God is the second most important duty, and that they're both inseparable and neither is acceptable without the other. And so it's a very powerful statement. Now, he doesn't say, by the way, that people who don't accept or haven't accepted are going to hell or anything. He never says that, and he never says that in any of his writings. He just says they've gone astray. They haven't yet found the ultimate truth. And so I think that's an important point as well. And then Baha'u'lláh goes on to say the nature of his laws. He says, "O you peoples of the world, know assuredly that my commandments are the lamps of my of my loving providence among my servants, and the keys of my mercy for my creatures. Thus hath it been sent down from the heaven of the will of your Lord, the Lord of revelation. Were any man to taste the sweetness of the words which the lips of the All-Merciful have willed to utter, he would, though the treasures of the earth be in his possession, renounce them one and all, that he might vindicate the truth of even one of his commandments, shining above the dayspring of his bountiful care and loving kindness. Observe my commandments for the love of my beauty. Happy is the lover that hath inhaled the divine fragrance of his best beloved from these words, laden with the perfume of a grace which no tongue can describe. So there's just beautiful here that, Baha'u'lláh says if you really understand the nature of the laws and you connect with them on a spiritual level, which he says you should follow them out of love, he says you would rather follow them than have all the treasures of the earth. That's the sweetness and the beauty that is involved in connecting with the word of God, right? And so were any man to taste the sweetness of the words, he would, though all the treasures of the earth be in his possession, renounce them, one and all, that he might vindicate the truth of just one of his commandments, right? And so you feel this connection as you study the writings of Baha'u'lláh and you read the Aqdas, and you just want to do what he says. It's out of love. It's not out of a sense of, and it's not really even out of a sense of duty. He captures you so beautifully with love. And then you just want to do what's best for you, So Baha'u'lláh says, think not that we have revealed to you a mere code of laws. Nay, rather we have unsealed the choice wine with the fingers of might and power. So when I was a young Baha'i, this was a really powerful idea. I was so moved by this and still am to this day. It's hard for me not to break up when reading these passages, just about that everything you do on a spiritual path is out of love. And that this mere code of law, it's not just a bunch of laws. It's really so much more than that. The sublimity is so beautiful. And that's the clothing in which Baha'u'lláh wraps his laws, right? And it's so attractive. So now I wanted to do a couple slides just sort of highlighting some of the things that Baha'u'lláh said in the Aqdas. And what I did is I went back through it, and and not all the Baha'i laws, by the way, are in the Aqdas. So not all the things that Baha'u'lláh asked us to do or not do are in the Aqdas. They're in other tablets as well that come out in the course of his ministry, of his revelation. But the Aqdas is where most of them are. At least they're alluded to in that. And much of everything builds off of it. But Baha'u'lláh says this. He says, O ye that dwelling on earth. This is about his own revelation. The distinguishing feature that marks the preeminent character of this supreme revelation consists in that we have, on the one hand, blotted out from the pages of God's holy book whatever has been the cause of strife, of malice, and mischief among the children of men, and have on the other laid down the essential prerequisites of concord, of understanding, of complete and enduring unity. Well is it with them that keep my statutes. So that Baha'u'lláh says that the supreme revelation, when he's abrogating certain laws, is because they've been causes of conflict. And partly also maybe because they're not consistent with modern realities. But, he's taken out the things in the text. And if you look back in the Quran and other places, there are things in there that are about war and about jihad and about all this other stuff, which were, appropriate for 1400 years ago among tribal peoples, but are not important and are not what you need to build a world civilization based on moral and spiritual principles, right? And so Baha'u'lláh takes all that stuff out, right? And then he puts back in place the law of God for today, right? So this is the law of God. When we, a lot of people talk about the law of God. Baha'u'lláh saying this is what the laws of God are for today, right? And, one of the things that I think is really important, and Baha'u'lláh makes this connection, and I don't see this connection being made by others, is this connection between unity and justice. That unless everyone in the world is treated fairly, you cannot have unity, right? And that because otherwise there's an oppressed and an oppressor. And Baha'u'lláh is really trying to create a community worldwide, not just the Baha'i community, but through his own teachings and the light that they shed on on the world, um, an idea of the solidarity in the of the world's peoples based on spiritual and moral principles in which no one is oppressed. That's the fundamental goal of his revelation. And he says, the light of men is justice. Quench it not with the contrary winds of oppression and tyranny. The purpose of justice is the appearance of unity. The ocean of divine wisdom surges within this exalted word, while the books of the world cannot contain its inner significance, right? So this, as Baha'u'lláh is laying out the laws of his revelation, which he says will be the spiritual and moral underpinnings of world civilization, he is saying that you cannot have unity without justice. And he names his institutions, the Baha'i Administrative Order, the International, the Universal House of Justice, right? And so all the world's peoples need to be treated fairly. Now, it's also true, and this is a connection I think is in the writings of Baha'u'lláh that I don't see said anywhere else. If you want to have unity on such a grand scale, a world's peoples, you can't have people that are immature, because people that are immature spiritually and morally can't be unified with others because they're focused on their own selves, right? So the spiritual and moral education is critical to unity, because it's only by people putting aside their own interests in the interest of the whole that we can finally get to unity. That's what happened when any nation that has survived is about local peoples putting aside their own interest for the interest of the whole, right? And so Baha'u'lláh has clearly said that unity relies on justice and justice relies on spiritual and moral education. And really what Baha'is are doing worldwide and continue to do this day is focused on spiritual and moral education, because we know that eventually, if the world is to be at peace, we have to have those principles from an early age that people understand so that they can be at peace with others. Okay? All right. So I wanted to make that point because I think it underlies the entire structure of the laws and teachings of Baha'u'lláh that begin to unfold in this period of time. So let's just talk about a couple things that come in the Aqdas. I think this is the new law of God, right? Baha'u'lláh says to open up your hearts to all people of whatever race and religion. There's no separation. You should not separate yourself at all. He said, consort with all religions in a spirit of amity and concord, that they may inhale from you the sweet fragrance of God. Beware lest amidst men the flame of foolish ignorance overpower you. Right? This line struck me when I was preparing for this talk, that Baha'u'lláh tells us to separate religion from politics. He said, none must contend with those who wield authority over the people. Leave them unto that which is theirs, and direct your attention to men's hearts, right? One can remember the passage in the Gospels of Jesus where his followers asked them, what should we do with Roman taxes? Should we pay them or not, right? And Jesus says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's, right? This separation between the two. And Baha'u'lláh really maintains that separation because politics is inherently divisive, right? And if you're trying to build a culture all over the world of spiritual and moral education and growing people to live in a world of unity, you can't let those politics things separate you. Okay, so I just went through the Aqdas and I sort of picked out a few things that I thought were interesting to just say. This next few slides are sort of summarizes a few past things. So things you need to do. You need to pray and fast. You need to get a job. Baha'u'lláh said you need to have a profession. You should engage in a profession or work, not rely on others. And you should by the way, pursue the sciences and the arts. That's specifically in there as well. You should contribute to the advancement of civilization. He said every human has been born to contribute to an ever-advancing civilization. Parents are obligated to educate their children, both girls and boys. In the time of Baha'u'lláh, this was not at all universal, and it certainly wasn't universal for girls. To educate girls was unique. And so Baha'i communities would then start setting up girls' schools, and they were the first to do it in those communities in the Middle East. And it was because Baha'u'lláh said you have to educate both girls and boys. He said you have to shower and bathe. You have to wear clean clothing and strive for refinement. Baha'u'lláh wanted people to be refined in their manners. Go to a competent physician when sick. He made the point that medicine is from God as well. Science is from God as well, and this is the idea in the Baha'i faith of the harmony of science and religion. We see science as an expression of the human mind, of the human spirit, and is effectively a spiritual activity. And Baha'u'lláh says the results of those efforts of scientific advancement, you should go and seek out when you need help. Go to a competent physician. Be kind to animals. Don't overburden them. Write a will. He does give some inheritance laws, but it tells everybody they should write a will. You should respond with joy and gladness to invitations. This is part of a theme in the writings of Baha'u'lláh of really making connections with people and hosting things and becoming social, because that creates unity and that creates connections among people. Baha'u'lláh defined a tax that is to occur on all luxury goods. So every individual at the end of the year looks at what they've spent and what they've saved. And if they've saved money over and above what they need to save and also their expenses in their life, if they have a luxury income, 19% of that, Baha'u'lláh said, belongs to God. But it's only your excess income, if you will, over and above what you need to live. And some people don't have anything beyond what they need to live and what they need to save for their children's education and all this other stuff. But some people do get extra money, right? And so Baha'u'lláh says 19% of that is for God. And you should teach Baha'u'llah's faith. So things you shouldn't do: engage in contention, conflict, or wounding or striking any other person, use drugs or alcohol, engage in backbiting and bad-mouthing other people, spread disorder and conflict among people. Baha'u'lláh forbids contention and contentious debates. That includes a lot of the political stuff we see. Commit murder or adultery. Carry weapons in public unless it's part of your job. Express overtly, these are things you shouldn't do. Express overtly religious acts in public. He says don't murmur prayers in the street. He said do it in your home or in places designated for that purpose, which is very interesting. Christ said the same thing, actually. He prescribed monogamy as the ideal, and then Abdu'l-Baha made it clear that Baha'i should only have one wife. Now, this was not the standard in his society, right? If you do separate and divorce, it's the responsibility of the man, if they're the moneymaker, to make sure the spouse during that period of separation is supported. You shouldn't use pulpits, right? So Baha'u'llah, this is classic in this time of history, these priests and mullahs getting up there and lecturing to the audience. Baha'u'llah said, no, you shouldn't do that because that's a sign of pride. You should sit a chair and speak to people at their level. It's very interesting. And don't beg for money. Get a job. So Baha'u'lláh wanted people to be productive and active and have engage in society, right? Things that are no longer part of the law of God: wearing veils, seeking forgiveness from a priest, becoming a priest or monk. Baha'u'lláh abolished clergy in a beautiful passage. He speaks directly to Christian priests and monks and says, we want you to venture into the world and not be secluded. There's no prohibition to listening to music or dancing. There are no food restrictions anymore. And Baha'u'lláh abrogated any form of fanaticism or bigotry that shuts you out from other people of other religions, faith, or traditions, right? So I thought those slides were a little bit fun, but I wanted to kind of give you a sense of what the law of God is in very sort of pragmatic terms. And then, of course, there's many, many other things, but these are sort of those pragmatic things, but there's so many beautiful principles in the faith that Baha'u'lláh reveals. So during his time here, Baha'u'lláh revealed many tablets. And after the Akdas, the laws were out, the community was becoming more mature. And so you saw these more mature tablets coming out about the nature of his revelation, and he's addressing a broader and broader audience. And then also Baha'u'llah's own exile is relieved, and he's able to leave the prison. And they rented this mansion that had been abandoned in a polio outbreak. And they were able to rent this mansion and move the community, Baha'u'llah and community followers, to this mansion. Now Baha'is have restored it, and it is where Baha'u'llah is buried. It's a shrine of great importance. With beautiful gardens around it. But at the time of Baha'u'llah, it was a dilapidated old mansion that they were able to rent and get him out of prison to come there. And so a lot of Baha'u'llah's later tablets and writings are revealed here. In a time of relative peace. He's no longer as much of a prisoner. The Ottomans kind of forgot about him, and they had their own troubles and would be overthrown soon. There's a lot of freedom locally. And Baha'u'llah revealed at this time tablets of Baha'u'llah. And so this is a collection. Well, it's not a singular book. What happened is that the Baha'i World Center took some of the more significant individual tablets that were revealed by Baha'u'llah during this time and compiled them in a book. And this is actually one of my favorite writings of Baha'u'llah because, the kind of the hay is in the barn. There's a lot of, a lot of the hard work has been done. And now he's really sort of educating a more mature community about the principles of his revelation and speaking to a broader audience. And I know we highlighted last week on this series of talks, the tablet of wisdom was highlighted, which is in there. And I know there's been other tablets of this highlighted in this series of talks, and they're just wonderful. I'm not going to go into detail on them, but I wanted to point out that a lot of the significant writings of Baha'u'llah are in the form of these tablets that are addressed to individuals. And so when you read the tablets of Baha'u'llah, you'll see that they're addressed to individuals, and then Baha'u'llah will start talking to the individual and then start talking about broader themes. And it's really remarkable because if I received a tablet of Baha'u'llah, the tablet is technically to me, but you'll find in it, it's really to the whole community and sometimes to the whole world. And Baha'u'llah will jockey between those various audiences. He will say one thing to an individual, and then he will switch in the next paragraph and say, "Oh, peoples of the world." It's really remarkable because these are the scriptures of a new revelation, right? And so, but they were written to these individuals, and it's really remarkable. So I love this. I love some of the passages of that have been come out recently. All the time we're getting from the vast corpus of Baha'u'llah's tablets, short passages. This is one that struck me. Baha'u'llah wrote to a woman who was concerned about her appearance. He says, "O my handmaid, concern not yourself that which is outwardly apparent. Turn thy gaze rather upon that which is within. Look upon the beauty of God's loved ones with his eye. Should thou not be possessed of an attractive appearance, know thou that inwardly they possess a beauty that arouses the envy of every beloved one. Physical beauty is loved by self and passion, while spiritual beauty is loved by God. Which then would thou choose?" And so you have a lot of these tablets that have sort of these beautiful people who've lost a son, people who've lost a father, mother bereaving the loss of a child. I mean, there's some beautiful tablets of Baha'u'llah consoling and addressing these individuals who are dealing with these things. And that's some of the real richness of the revelation of Baha'u'llah that's so beautiful. Okay. So I wanted to highlight one other tablet before I finish, and I know I'm running long, as I always do, and I apologize. I always take on too much. That was revealed to this time, and it was revealed within a year of Baha'u'llah's passing, and that is this work known as the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, which clearly has the coolest title of any of Baha'u'llah's writings. The Epistle to the Son of the Wolf is a remarkable work, and I don't even think we as Baha'is talk about it enough. It's really amazing. And so let me tell you the story behind the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, so that when you read it, you understand what it's about. So it is in many ways Baha'u'llah's what they call apologia. It is him summarizing his revelation to an individual that was critical of it and his defense of it, if you will. And he, in this tablet, this long tablet to this individual, he really he not only summarizes his revelation and talks about it, but he also quotes passages that he's revealed previously in this one long tablet. And so it's really kind of summative, if you will. If you were to read one thing of the writings of Baha'u'llah and you didn't want to read everything, or you wanted to just get the highlights, the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf is the book to read, because it's Baha'u'llah's own summary of his revelation. But let me tell you the story of this. So it's written to a mullah who had killed and persecuted the Baha'is. And in the city of Esfahan in Iran. And Esfahan is a beautiful city, and I've never been there, but I've seen pictures. And if Iran ever does open up for Baha'is to visit, I would love to go and see Esfahan. And it's in central Iran, a little south of Tehran. And it's been a great city. It's a center of learning and great religious learning in particular over the centuries, and has beautiful architecture. And there's a famous passage in the writings of the Bab about the city of Esfahan, and I just wanted to highlight it because the Bab sent his own disciples up to there, announcing his revelation. And there's this beautiful passage in the writings of the Bab where he says, "In the land of Esfahan, which to great seeming is a great city, in every corner of whose seminaries are vast numbers of people regarded as divines and doctors," meaning learned priests and so forth. "Yet when the time came for the inmost essences to be drawn forth, only its sifter of wheat donned the robe of discipleship. This is the mystery of what was uttered concerning this revelation, saying the abased shall be exalted and the exalted shall be abased." So, when the teachers went up to Esfahan to talk to the religious leaders and tell them of the coming of the Bab, it was only their sifter of wheat who actually believed in him in that first pass. And the Bab uses that as reminding us of this gospel idea that's also in the Quran, that at the time of the coming of a messenger of God, the abased is exalted and the exalted abased, because people get so focused on their own learning that they don't hear the true word of God. So in any case, that's sort of the story, beginning of the story of Esfahan. But actually, there were many people that did become Baha'is, including a very wealthy family with two brothers. And the story is that these two brothers were very wealthy, and there were three main mullahs and mosques in Esfahan at this point. There were two of them that were actually very moderate and let the Baha'is do their thing and didn't persecute them. But there was a third that really did. And the two others, the two more moderate ones, the leaders died. And the third one, by this father and son, run by this father and son, really sought to take over the city. Now, in their taking over the city, what they were trying to do they were not doing it for a religious reason. They wanted the religious tax. They wanted the money. And so they, and they were also fighting with the sort of civil leader of the area, the governor, if you will, the mayor, who also wanted money and would have his own tax, right? And so they were always fighting to see who got the taxes. And so they became a bit of a mafia, frankly, in this area. And so there were two individuals, one of them Baha'u'llah named the Wolf because of his persecution of the Baha'is. And then the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf is to his son, who also persecuted the Baha'is. And in particular, what they did is one of them became very indebted to a Baha'i family who were quite wealthy. And they conspired with the mayor, if you will, to have these men condemned so they could liquidate all their riches. And they did. And these two men were killed, and they took all their money. And So Baha'u'lláh is writing a tablet back to the individual who did this, right? Who did this heinous act against not only his community, but against anything of justice, right? Any sense of justice. And it's remarkable to me, and has always been remarkable, that he wrote such a significant work to such a dastardly soul, you know? And he starts it out and he says, "Give ear, O distinguished divine, to the voice of this wrong one, counseling you for the sake of God, and exhorts thee unto that which will cause thee to draw nigh unto him under all conditions. We beseech thee, God, to aid thee to be just and fair-minded. He in truth is the mighty, the unconstrained. We ask thee to reflect upon that which hath been revealed, and to be fair and just in thy speech, that perchance the splendors of the day star of truthfulness and sincerity may shine forth, and may deliver thee from the darkness of ignorance, and illumine the world with the light of knowledge." As in many tablets of Baha'u'lláh, I think the recipient really didn't deserve it. This guy certainly didn't deserve this majestic tablet of Baha'u'lláh, or book of Baha'u'lláh. But he speaks to him still with great love. And at the beginning of the Epistle of the Son of the Wolf, he gives him 2 prayers of forgiveness to read. And then he bestows upon him this magnificent work. And so I don't even know if he read it. It probably doesn't matter if he read it. It was for us as much as him. But I think that the fact that Baha'u'lláh still regarded these dastardly souls as worthy of salvage, you know, and treated them, he says, "Oh, distinguished divine," you know, manifestation of God speaking to a dastardly guy, and, you know, still treats him with respect. There's something there also. And so, but in any case, Baha'u'lláh reveals this whole long tablet in the Epistle of the Son of the Wolf, summarizing his revelation. And he says this. He says, "O Sheikh," that's his title, it was Sheikh, of the men receiving the tablet. He says, "The breezes of revelation can never be confounded with other breezes. These utterances themselves proclaim the true nature of the faith of God. To demonstrate the truth of his revelation, he hath not been, nor he is dependent on anyone. Well nigh 100 volumes of luminous verses have already been sent down from him who is the revealer of signs, and are available to all. It is for thee to direct thyself towards the ultimate goal, the supreme end, the most sublime pinnacle, that thou mayest hear and behold what hath been revealed by God, the Lord of the worlds." And, you know, he's obviously speaking to the sheikh and the thing, but I think he's speaking to all of us. He's speaking to all of humanity. He says, "Well nigh 100 volumes of luminous verses have been revealed. It is for thee to direct thyself towards them, you know, that thou mayest hear and behold what was revealed." And, you know, Baha'u'lláh forget again and again in his writings, saying, "I'm not doing this for me. I don't get anything out of it," right? "I've been imprisoned. I've been tortured. I've been poisoned, right? My family's been exiled. I didn't get anything out of this, right? I'm just doing this for you and revealing these luminous, majestic, sublime words for us." And he tells us, you know, "It is for thee to direct thyself towards the ultimate goal, the supreme end, and the most sublime pinnacle." So I just wanted to end with that. Now, the Baha'u'lláh passed away, or end the discussion of the Epistle of the Son of the Wolf with that. But I don't want to end it completely, because Baha'u'lláh passed away a year later, and in his Book of his Covenant, he gives a summary of his revelation. He says, "O ye that dwell on earth, the religion of God is for love and unity. Make it not the cause of enmity or dissension. Conflict and contention are categorically forbidden in his book. This is a decree of God. It is divinely preserved from annulment, and is invested by him with the splendor of his confirmation. Verily, he is the all-knowing, the all-wise. That which is conducive to the regeneration of the world and the salvation of the peoples and kindreds of the earth hath been sent down from the heaven of the utterance of him who is the desire of the world. Better is this for you than all that is on earth." I really can't say anything. I put so many quotes of the writings of Baha'u'lláh in these talks and then I just let my own babble fill in the spaces in between. But, you know, what I really wanted you to hear out of these talks were the majestic word of God, and and the beautiful words of Baha'u'lláh, so that you will also, and anyone who listens to this talk will have an introduction to them, will be able to pick them up and understand them, and begin to read them and let them enrich your life. So I have been enriched so much by the writings of Baha'u'lláh, but also just understanding the context of Baha'u'lláh. I wanted to say a few things. There are some wonderful works out there. Shoghi Effendi, of course, is just magnificent in his explanations of the writings of Baha'u'lláh and the history that he writes about and so forth. Many Baha'is have been enriched by the works of Adib Taherzadeh, former member of the House of Justice, who's now passed from us, who wrote a 4-volume series called The Revelation of Baha'u'lláh that really places within historical context many of the most significant tablets of Baha'u'lláh, and some of which have not been translated yet. And that's a magnificent thing to read. Hassan Balyuzi, the great scholar of the Baha'i Faith, wrote a book called Baha'u'lláh, the King of Glory, which tells the story of Baha'u'lláh. In 2007, Mujan Momen came out with a book called Baha'u'lláh, a Short Biography, which is written for the public. And it's really terrific. I read it last year. I'd never seen it before, and I found it and read it, and I read it very quickly because it's fantastic. I really recommend that to everyone. It's not very long. I read it probably in a day. I was so entranced by it. And it just has some stories in there that I hadn't heard before. It's really great. So Mujan Momen, a British physician who's Baha'i scholar and really has just enriched the Baha'i community so much with his academic work over the years. All of Baha'u'llah's tablets and all of the Baha'i writings are available at the Baha'i Reference Library. So you can simply Google Baha'i Reference Library. You'll have access. Everything in the Baha'i Faith is transparent. Everything's available. Jonah Winters, a Baha'i, has put together the Baha'i Library online, which is his private site, and just has an amazing selection and a compilation of articles and talks and scholarly work on the Baha'i Faith. It's a terrific site for understanding various things. And then I want to call out to the provisional translation websites. I know there are many now. I have followed folks I haven't met, but I really appreciate. Adib Musumian has a wonderful site. Joshua Hall has done beautiful translations at joshuahalltranslations.org, and gives beautiful introductions to the theology of that. So those are all sites that really have enriched my understanding of the faith, and I just want to let you know that they're out there for you to read more about the faith. But I would just pick up the writings of Baha'u'lláh and start reading them, because you will be enriched beyond belief. So with that, I'm going to end my talk. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Williams, for that great talk. That was very comprehensive, and I hope everyone enjoyed it. Maybe
I said it would
we'll
be
have
shorter.
time.
I said it would be short. I said it would be shorter than the first one. It ended up being longer. I'm sorry.
Well, there's a lot of material to get through.
Yeah, I didn't realize to talk too much.
No, it's okay. Let me just maybe pick one question. Did any of the kings or rulers that Baha'u'lláh write to formally respond to him?
I think the most positive response came from Queen Victoria, who said, if this is of God, it will survive. If not, it won't. But that was kind of a tepid, I guess, of response. None of them responded specifically to my knowledge. I mean, so the Shah of Iran, didn't, I don't think Baha'u'lláh ever met the Shah personally, although he may have. That was the one that was closest to him. But he was sort of a deeply kind of fearful man. And so that would have been the closest, I think, to responding to him. Yeah. But none of them specifically did, to my knowledge. They were sent through diplomats mostly.
Good. Thank you. So we will be putting this talk on YouTube, so you can rewatch it or share it. And if you have any other questions, you can leave it in the comments on our YouTube video, and we can reply, or Dr. Williams can reply to your questions. So our speaker next week will be Dr. Haida Sabet, and she'll be talking about the Baha'i perspective on family life and its society building power. So again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time. And if you're not subscribed or on our mailing list, I put the link to that in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye, everybody.